So I have spoken about how dealing rationally with the defining feature of Donald Trump's previous presidency, that is his psychological dangerousness, was thwarted by the American Psychiatric Association itself. This resulted in his symptoms being unmitigated, spreading rampantly, and reversing reality to the point where the unfit became fit, the perpetrators became victims, and violence became love. Prevention is the most effective and least effortful in public health interventions, and education is central for prevention. So the APA's authoritarian campaign to stop expert knowledge from getting to the public had a decisive effect in allowing all the subsequent calamities and failures, including many that spilled into the Biden administration, to occur, so that ironically, they have helped bring Trump back into power. When the human species is in a state like ours, through its own madness, if you will, positioning itself to be the first species on the planet to bring about its own extinction, going beyond what has been tried so far is going to be critical. As Albert Einstein believed, we cannot solve our problems with the same thinking we use to create them. The pathology that Donald Trump unleashed on our society had long been developing and will remain for quite some time after he's gone. And political violence can be projected to increase for a while. But what I've been emphasizing is that as Trump and his cronies rise, we need to stop them through proper intervention. Otherwise, it will keep growing worse until they become unstoppable. Of course, it's become difficult because our failure to intervene early in the course set in motion what has so far made humanity a passive spectator and adopter of the seeds of our own destruction, which is what I've been calling a death spiral. These are the undercurrents of what is superficially seen as corporate interests over planet habitability, military interests over democracy, Republican fascism, democratic complacency, and alignment with aggressors such as China, Russia, and Israel in our race toward World War III. But ultimately, everything comes down to the state of our overall psychological and ultimately our spiritual health. And so that is why safeguarding our collective spirit is going to be of foremost importance. This is the eye of the hurricane, where in the midst of chaos, a new vision can arise. And once it is established, what happens in the outer world will simply become an outpicturing of what is within. So in order for this shift to happen, we'll start reviewing some concepts that can point to some internal realities that we can build. So the first I'd like to address is power. In fact, today we'll discuss power and peace. So when fascism or mental pathology in politics is on the rise, you might notice that there's a great emphasis on power. Suddenly, power is not something that is shared or utilized for a common purpose, as in a democracy, but a commodity that is to be wrested from others and kept for oneself, often to abuse and to use against others. This concept of power rises from a paranoid disposition, either from a distant memory of being powerless and therefore needing to subjugate before being subjugated, or actually to hide a leader's or one's own unfitness for a position. One covets positions for the influence they bring, but then detests them for the light they shed on one's own inadequacy and incompetence. Indeed, the drive for this kind of power is pathological, actually, and becomes dangerous. The one mental symptom that is associated with violence, in fact, is paranoia. or the perception of threat where it does not exist, having nothing to do with actual threat. And the dysfunctional responses ultimately bring about one's own destruction, as well as the destruction of others. The word power traces back to the old French pouvoir, which means ability or to be able. To get to the goal of true ability, we must cultivate the inner strength necessary not to get swept up in an intoxication with domineering so-called power. And I'll illustrate how this is not real power. Because once we cease to believe in it, it ceases to exist. So a distinction between true power and guise of power is pretty crucial. Decisive interventions such as hospitalization or incarceration in a way that is commensurate with the dangers or meets the need of the situation can be empowering for the public. What Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman actually shockingly accused us of was when he called us Nazi and Soviet style psychiatrists, was the bending of science to suit the power players of the moment. But that's not what we're speaking of. It's actually the opposite. The former, or true power, operates on prior agreement of standards, regardless of political position, and then we apply them according to the situation at hand. The latter, on the other hand, bends the rules to favor those in power, and that is exactly what the American Psychiatric Association did in the Trump era, when it suddenly redefined the Goldwater rule to achieve what the people in power wanted: silence at all cost. So abuse of power is necessarily violence, and political theorist Hannah Arendt correctly pointed out that power and violence are opposites. But I would go further to say that power and violence, or guise of power in the case of violence, are not only opposites, but inversely proportionate to each other. In other words, when power decreases, violence increases, and when violence decreases, true power emerges. So consequently, when there's a greater guise of power, it means there's actually less power. Once we come to this realization, we can lose any fear, and the mirage of guise of power no longer works. Guise of power, relying only on illusion, has a garish appearance. It's obtrusive, forceful, and can never rest. It needs constantly to demonstrate its legitimacy through threats, intimidation, and posturing. A lot of what we've been seeing lately. Guise of power may employ physical force, economic oppression, or legal means to achieve its ends at the micro level, and military might, economic sanctions, and political power at the macro level. But still, it does not change the fact that it curbs, not bolsters, our true collective capacity. Guise of power is what represents power for most people, whether it be protesters who engage in speaking truth to power, or political realists who find comfort in a powerful military. But we need to distinguish between guise of power and to recognize that it is not power at all, because one is false and the other is real. And once the real is recognized, then the hollow pretense of power loses its sway, and indeed any semblance of power. So unlike the illusory non-power, true power does not need to attract immediate attention, but operates with a quiet, enduring strength that is life-affirming, generative, and generous. One sees the truth of it in its fruits, which will be creative and not destructive. In fact, it's quite productive, we will find. And peace itself is not simply absence of violence, but true generativity. True ability leads to a natural self-assurance and lack of need for dramatic displays, since a firm foundation allows for the fostering of following through positive reinforcement and rewards, rather than through compulsion, and competition. The principles of true power are compassion, cooperation, and trust, not cruelty, coercion, and fear. And those who are interested only in the real will be impressed with this kind of power and see authority, influence, and charisma in it, far more than in primitive imitative displays. So I'm illustrating all this to show how everything that we are seeing in our current climate is actually simply an illusion. Then this brings us to another paradox, that guise of power is actually weakness. An illustration of this is seen with violence, which in an extreme form of guise of power becomes a mimicry of animation and strength intended to compensate for a lack of power and, in fact, hidden feelings of shame and inadequacy. It lasts only as long as it can deceive. So violence ultimately dissipates what it has hoarded and destroys what it purports to protect. Once violence is seen for what it is, we can release true power, such as nonviolence. Nonviolence is an application of true power, the source of thriving democracies, of successful campaigns against brutal dictators, and of actual productivity and performance. These demonstrations show that there's only one power, in fact. And the guise that is often referred to as power is not power at all, but a facade, a chimera, and an optical illusion intended to mask the opposite. In other words, the lack of power. So let's talk about peace. What is often omitted from consideration is the misery and pain that accompanies mental pathology. Projecting the cause onto everyone else and everything else, one creates false enemies, attacks those who could be of help, and looks for relief where it cannot be found. Here, paranoia is again a barrier to peace. No peace is possible where danger constantly lurks in one's mind, and one must be prepared to attack before one is attacked. Threat brings fear, hostility, and rage, where attacking in advance seems reasonable, honestly provoked, and righteous in self-defense, when in fact it's generating reasons for threat. Yet this inability to be still and find peace within oneself is the generator of treachery and threat, not the external world. When I began working in the maximum security prisons, it impressed me how in each cell block there would be an average of one felony-level violent incident occurring every week. Everyone was on guard, unable to sleep if one had a cellmate, and to stay safe, each would have to prove oneself more violent than the others. A hierarchy would form with the most violent prisoner at the top, and each newcomer had to prove himself too menacing to be messed with in order not to become a victim. Therefore, there was constant fighting and an environment where fellow inmates could have been of support to one another during a difficult time, but instead they became their worst enemies, placing themselves in a dire atmosphere of suspicion, fear, victimization, and need for vengeance. The prison inmates would be the last to recognize that the environment they created was of their own making, through their own choice. There may be a small difference in degree, but we in the outside world actually do the same. We feel threatened by a changing world, its twists of fortune, its bitter gifts, which seem to be given only to be taken away, and its seeming provisions of no safety, but only threat. Defenses are the costliest of all mental functions, which can only sink more deeply into a frenzy of self-protection and enslavement of the mind in a vicious circle of intensifying perceptions of creations of danger. The chaos and defeat one generates are blamed only on others, so that one seeks revenge and retribution when no solution can be found in these. Whether one hoards all the wealth of 99% of the world or beats up a passerby for one's wallet, peace of mind will not be possible if not generated from within, because that's the only source from which it comes. And one does not see the sacrifice of one's potentialities, one's curtailed dreams and aspirations, and abandoned hopes for humanity through the sense of safety one has destroyed. So as one puts up guard, defends, and prepares for the next attack, the opportunities one is detracting from, and ultimately the entire civilizations that one will have caused to suffer, will be incalculable. But one does not see those things. Peace is hard for those who look upon the world amiss. Therefore, reversing the course will depend on changing our view. Or it helps to know that peace is our natural state, in fact. If we can be still for a moment and quiet in our thoughts, finding a small space of security and innocence, and then expanding it, trusting that truth will ultimately comfort, then we will not be so fearful of the outside world. We can relax a little, tolerate reality, and accept our faults, and the world does not seem so unforgiving and menacing. This is an internal change that must happen as it has very little to do with the outside world. Peace naturally arises when we let go of conflicting goals, senseless pursuits, and frantic protections of ourselves from the wrong sources, when we needed only to protect ourselves from our own thoughts. So when peace is achieved in the heart and mind, one will not only be comforted, but come to experience joy. And fear and hostility melt away into gratitude, love, and ultimately bliss. This is what we all yearn for. And remember, not knowing that we have always had it within ourselves and have been capable of it. If only we would allow ourselves a time and space to access it, because this is essentially the source of mental health. As anger dissipates and fears disappear, we find that what arises in their place is bliss, abundance, generosity, and love for humanity. In my clinical work with violent offenders, it's been remarkable just what mundane things would allow them to let go of a lifetime pursuit and posturing of violence. It would only take a job, a friendship, a sense of belonging. This is what Donald Trump falsely promises when he beckons to some unspecified time in the past and promises to make America great again. Of course, because what he's offering is unreal, he exacts a high price for it, and including one's agency, one's personality, personhood, and total sacrifice of oneself in exchange for membership in an exclusive club that exploits for what it purports to offer. The most they can do then is to see themselves as better off than others and content themselves with the belief that others suffer more than they. North Koreans, who are so famished that they routinely go blind, believe that they are better off than any other people on earth, and they are ready to engage in bitter and relentless attack of anyone who would challenge their cherished beliefs, having sacrificed so dearly for investment in these beliefs. But what is real does not require such a price. The experience of true peace is so fulfilling, gratifying, and expansive, one cannot help but wish to share it. and give it to the world. And the more one shares, the more one recognizes one has. It is this experience that one discovers a reality that operates by principles very different from the ones of the world, the zero sum, the win-lose, and constant scarcity that Trump and his cronies arise from, and which we have become accustomed to from adapting to the world's state of mind. There's such abundance that comparisons disappear, hatred is forgotten, and divisiveness no longer exist. They simply dissolve. Total gratitude replaces fear, malice, and revenge. It's difficult at first and takes practice, but soon momentum builds. We can cultivate this in ourselves. And instead of Trump contagion or any other spread of disease, there will be spread of health and wholeness throughout oneself and then to others. One can only begin to imagine the possibilities from here and the kind of world we can create from it. It all begins with this state of mind. It's a level so far removed from the path of disease and death that we've walked that the prior state will be hardly imaginable. That is a state to which we wish to get to. And this knowledge is not only possible, but is our natural state, that once grief and misery are removed will make nothing seem impossible. This, I believe, is what anthropologist Margaret Mead was referring to when she said, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed individuals can change the world. In fact, it's the only thing that ever has."